I wanted to spend some time in this panel just talking to some of the vendors who are at the, I guess, the cutting edge of delivering cloud solutions, what you might call cloud native vendors in many cases, and certainly those who are getting there. I guess you're all vendors, but really this comes down to how cloud is used by customers. So is this something that's being driven and asked for by customers, or is cloud something that everybody's doing just because everyone is doing it? I'll start at the left and work along. So Erik, you're kind of...
Is this on, or is it?
It is on.
It is on. Yeah. Perfect. I think where we are right now, I think it's even so that it's beyond the technology choice. It's more of like it's starting to define our customers' business. Whether they use it or not, it's defining competition, technology in the end, and so on. So I think it's a clear yes. Whether it's all cloud, hybrid cloud, cloud business models, that's a different story. But everyone is moving in that direction, yes.
Good. I forgot to introduce you properly as CEO. Vidisspine has been a cloud-native company. I'll introduce everyone as we go along. Paul Thompson from Avid, big, obviously well-known company. Clearly not a company that was started in the cloud, but you've been heading in that way. So what's been driving that?
Well, I think from a customer perspective, all the customers are starting at different points. And it's quite clear when we have discussions with the customers that, you know, if we really get into what they really want to accomplish, the business outcomes are substantially different to what they can achieve today with the traditional on-premise solution. So from a strategy perspective, what we're very keen to provide is a platform that's open, that can allow media to flow around the organization. But the important aspect from a cloud perspective is that we don't want to prescribe to the customer how they deploy it. We want to give the customer the choice of, do they want to continue to use it on-prem? Do they want to use it in a hybrid way? Or do they want to use it as purely 100% cloud native?
Micky, we heard obviously Tim's one of your customers using your solution. So Amagi is a company that you represent. That's kind of what I would call a cloud native company. So I guess for you it's cloud or nothing. But you're, I suppose, using that in a way to challenge maybe some of the incumbents in the play-out and the automation and the play-out services space.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is provide enough information so clients can make an informed decision on which way they go. I mean, there's a number of different routes, whether they use public, private, cloud, and where they host the equipment. As Tim mentioned, you know, we can do it in a data center, we can do it right on the edge, we can actually do it virtually as well. So it really depends on what the circumstances are with the client and what they want to achieve with it. But normally it's about efficiencies, driving down costs, and making the revenues grow within the business.
Great. And our fourth panelist, Ramki Sankaranarayanan, is CEO of Prime Focus Technologies. And again, you've been kind of real proponents of the cloud right from the outset. What's been the driver there?
I think 8-9 years ago, if I had said cloud, you know, customers would have said, get out of here. But I think, you know, I think more recently, if we don't sort of talk about cloud in the first, you know, few minutes of our conversation, you know, there's an obvious question saying, don't you do much in the cloud? I think there is a paradigm shift I've seen over the last few years. I think more recently, I think what is driving the cloud adoption is more business-led. You know, I think, you know, our customers, especially broadcasters today, are defining their competitors have become very different. Today, most of them having, you know, direct-to-consumer platforms, and suddenly they seem to compete with, you know, as they call the F companies and G companies. And so naturally, they all have, you know, they build technology once, put it up once up on the cloud. And whether you're in Thailand or Silicon Valley or in Buenos Aires, it's the same platform that sort of manifests itself. So the cost of innovation is very high. And so the notion of broadcasters also sort of building technology platforms sort of once and sort of making sure that there is centralization, there's standardization of technology that is there. And so I think cloud sort of becomes obvious, you know, in that kind of construct.
So picking up on that kind of question of the value it's creating, I think I chaired a discussion at IBC this year where we talked about this, and I think the one conclusion was actually there are many benefits from cloud, but the economics may not be top of the list. So I'm keen to get your ideas of what value does a cloud-based solution offer to a broadcaster or a media company? Is that real value, or is it just some sort of cloud snake oil that everyone's using? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. No, there can be real tangible benefits. I mean, if they're already using cloud storage, then we can do like intra-cloud bucket transfers, and that saves on cost of hauling the media backwards and forwards. So there's definitely tangible costs in using cloud.
Eric, what are you seeing with the sort of media asset management world?
Yeah, I think it's about agileness. People tend to think that cloud is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's also about deploying very small installs at the same in multi-tenant and be able to be flexible in what we call from file to audience, where that audience pop-ups for the next few hours and so on. So it's agileness and scalability in both directions.
I think I would go further. I think I would say, you know, the challenges we see our customers having is how do you create better stories? How do you create them faster? And you know, if you take an existing workflow today and move it to the cloud, it'll probably work. Will it work in the best possible way? That's to be debated. But if you start thinking about all of the things that the technology in the cloud can add to the content creation process, then it's a whole new type of workflow. I mean, I guess the next case study, we'll hear some interesting activity around using AI to enrich content from quickly. But also, you know, let's spin forward another couple of years. How will AI create its own workflow? So, you know, today workflows are reasonably static. Maybe there's some manual intervention. Maybe it's quick to facilitate a new platform. What about if we go completely hands-off and let the AI do that?
So that's interesting. Let me pick up with you on this one, Ramki. Maybe to date we've been thinking about quote-unquote lifting and shifting workflows and putting them into the cloud because maybe there's some efficiency and it can scale and et cetera, et cetera. Have we been missing the point with that, and the real driver is perhaps unlocking new stuff that we could never do before?
I think it's a combination. First of all, to your earlier question, I think, to my mind, I think the transition to cloud, while there are many other benefits, I think cost benefits is a given. As far as we are concerned, you know, the total cost of operations, managing the total cost of operations, you know, is a given from a cloud perspective. And so it ought to be lower than what you would ever sort of experience before. But the question of lift and shift, I think the transition to cloud is an important topic. I think we don't believe in lift and shift. And that's why we've sort of, right from day one, have this hybrid cloud model where we continue to sort of leverage on-prem infrastructure that has been there, sunk capital, and consequently is trying to use that. But the key sort of thing that we've done is sort of standardized one application. You know, the infrastructure, storage, transcode, and stuff like that can be sort of local and so on, but the application is what we centralize. And that, I think, works very well from just the, you know, you're not sort of going from sort of, you know, lift and shift, but there can be a gradual transition to the cloud.
Great. So in a moment, as technology vendors, I'm going to turn the focus to what it means to build a cloud solution versus a traditional one. But let's take a couple of questions that are coming, because there's a few interesting ones here. First one, I'll take the one that's top of the list. Multiple clouds exist, and I guess that means multiple public cloud providers. So AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and others. Is that causing a problem in adoption? I wouldn't have thought so. Generally, I see the trend being that more flexibility is a good thing.
I would say we're pretty agnostic. You know, we can run on a private or public cloud, so there's no real issue there with being able to use different instances.
I think from a cost perspective, they're reasonably equal. I think from one of the things we've discovered is that from a hybrid deployment, we're doing a lot of work with Microsoft Azure, and we see the on-prem stack has been interesting because it's an interesting stepping stone to going to full public cloud. The benefits of cloud as an operating system, shall we say, but actually deployed on your own hardware and your own infrastructure.
Great. Now I'm going to take a question that came in just a moment ago, because that leads into this theme of how does a cloud-based solution look differently in terms of how you develop it from maybe a traditional, obviously hardware or on-premise software. And the question is, unless your solution is born in the cloud, then can it really ever be fully cloud ready in terms of the benefits and optimization that come in? So in other words, if you take a bit of existing software, virtualize it and run it on a VM on cloud infrastructure, is that the real deal, or are you missing out on that? Eric?
Yeah, so I've been doing both. So I have some insights into this. And I would say that you need to do your homework, not only on technology, but also on business models, sales, go-to-market, margin structures, everything. And if you're not, there's a Swedish word for that called rökt, which means that you have nowhere to go otherwise than really redesign everything you do and re-strategize. Because it's not just about technology, it's also about how you organize yourself to live in an as-a-service model, software, infrastructure, and platform as a service, which is completely different compared to like a project-based, in my case, MAM environment. But also pricing models. You have to realize that cloud is about commoditization. And in a commoditized world, you have completely different metrics on how you succeed compared to in a kind of high-end, few-vendor, bespoke kind of world. So it's radically different, I would say.
That's quite interesting. So perhaps we've all been guilty of thinking too much about workflows and technology that underpins cloud and missing the point that unless you completely build your business around a cloud and as-a-service model where the revenue is different and the sales model is different, then you may not be successful. So at Avid, you've had to kind of make that transition a bit, or going through that transition.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd answer the question maybe with taking the persona of a user. The user really doesn't care what the tech is. If it's deployed on cloud, or if it's deployed on hybrid, or if it's deployed on-prem, they still want to have the same quality of service as they have had, and if there's extra capability there, that's fantastic. So, we need to be very careful as vendors to make sure we don't get carried away with the technical intricacies of how it's deployed. Ultimately, it's the users have to be comfortable adopting it and see extra benefit, be it being able to get to more content more easily wherever that content's being created.
And Micky and Ramki, you maybe have a slight advantage here in that you are sort of born in the cloud.
Yeah.
Has that meant that you've been able to construct your businesses in a different way?
Yeah, I think being a SaaS model, I think you have that advantage. We strongly believe, we tell CFOs that, you go put your cash flow into content rather than technology that obsoletes every day. Content that's created kind of brings you annuity revenue on the back of, so it's clearly there is a commercial argument that we can make. But more importantly, being on the cloud is you're innovating in one place. And so as every release of yours brings in new features and new value to customers, and they are able to sort of embrace that, as against on-prem. I think that's the bigger attraction.
And Micky, it was interesting at Amagi that you took the view of not just creating some technology, but thinking about the services that go around that, such as the network center that Tim mentioned.
Yeah, creating that, as well as doing things with rendering services in the cloud as well, and a whole bunch of other ancillary services that we can put on top of that. So it's about building out those and listening to the clients as well and see what their requirements are. So it's very important. There's no point in building a service that nobody's going to use. So it's really key to listen to what the clients are asking for and develop it around there. From a pop-up channel that's up there for a day, a week, or a year, they're the sort of services that clients are coming to us and asking for.
So let's take another couple of questions if we can, just because I think some of them pick up on that. There's one question I think is great, which is about how people are buying cloud. So think of us as technology vendors wanting to create cloud services. You've got to do a lot, as we've said, in terms of the technology and the business model. But are the buyers who are in the room, are they changing enough? And are they still trying to shoehorn cloud into very traditional procurement models where there's long cycles and so on? Eric, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think there's been a quick change in that just the last 12 or 18 months, actually. Coming from that AWS and Microsoft and Google did a great job explaining what infrastructure as a service actually is, which is now kind of rippling off into the platform layer and eventually, I guess, the SaaS layer. So I think there's a much greater understanding of what that means and the benefits that it can bring. But it's been quick. I think the last year or so, it's been a tremendous change. Yeah.
I think it depends on the customer. You take the two extremes. You have a business that has got infrastructure that's still got multiple years to depreciate, perhaps a big public sector company, and the attractiveness of moving to cloud is perhaps for additional services that may be only for short-term usage. The other end of the spectrum, as we've just seen from the last case study, is where it's a brand new build and it's very easy, I'm not sure that's the right term, but it's more straightforward to do 100% cloud deployment. There is a vast number of customers between those two extremes. And I think that's where the flexibility of being able to buy what you need for your business, perhaps it is an on-prem solution for 80% of it, but perhaps it's being able to have that flexibility of buying elastic pay-as-you-go services when you need it to do what you need to do with it.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's really down to the client requirements and actually looking at new business models as well, something that they may not have considered before. So, having the agility and flexibility to run a service for a day or a week gives them a very different look on what they can do within the business.
Good. I'm going to take another question so we can switch things around a little bit. And there's one that's just come in that I think is fantastic. Do you see a day when we have an entire TV studio in the cloud, I guess, minus the cameras, it says, hopefully? So in other words, will we get to the stage that the vast majority of production technology, whether it's for live signal or for file-based workflows, will we get to the point that everything's just in the cloud and we don't need to worry about it? Or is that kind of far-fetched? Ramki, you kind of do quite a lot of that end-to-end, so...
Yeah, I think it's an evolution. I think, I do see that, but, it's going to take some time and, live is sort of still sort of on the edge in terms of sort of, getting there from a reliability and, and people having the sort of risk-taking ability to kind of, take the leap. But yeah, it'll take some time, but it'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at processes that can be automated, that traditionally are done by humans that can be done by machine learning technology. So there's a number of those in development that we're working through at the moment, so we can definitely see a lot of these processes moving up onto the cloud to be managed autonomously.
Any thoughts in terms of what you're seeing there?
I mean, we're doing a bunch of stuff around global news production. That's going to be completely in the cloud. I think it's going to vary as well because of some of the channels are going to lend themselves to be completely automated. There's no reason why AI couldn't be used to auto-create schedules, no human intervention at all. But there's also going to be a need to have that art of content creation as well. So the tools for that may exist in the cloud, but going back to my point earlier, the user just needs to have the capability. They don't really care where it's hosted or how it works.
So one of the things we've seen kind of recently that the public cloud providers have been promoting quite heavily is the idea of a marketplace of different services and plugins. And we heard about microservices earlier. And Erik, I know I think it was IBC this year, you launched your own kind of equivalent of like a platform.
Yeah, Vidnet, yeah.
Combination of a technology platform and a marketplace. And there's a good question where, what are your predictions about what's going to happen to these cloud marketplaces? Are they going to become important? Do you still need things to glue them together? Does that become a solution in the future? Will we even need to go to kind of integrators, or where do you see that playing out?
No, I think definitely there's room for integrators. If you look at the history of IT, software, and so on, this is just another technology that gets commoditized. And what happens is that you kind of commoditize from the ground up, but eventually you come to the SaaS layer. And of course, there's always, even Salesforce is customized these days, right? But it's still a SaaS solution. So of course, there can be marketplace and different business models and all that. But to make real value and innovation on top of that, there's always going to be room for creative engineers and software designers and so on, of course.
Any other thoughts on those marketplaces?
I think that's the advantage of the cloud, that your ability to kind of have dynamically resources available for you to connect. And if there's a new end use that's coming up and you need to wrap something up quickly, I think marketplace is a great place to go sort of leverage some of those functionalities that's available on tap. I think that's great. And how it gets used, I think it'll evolve. I mean, if you really look at how cloud vendors tend to sell today, it's while we all say it's on demand and so on and so forth, I think if you look at fundamentally how everybody wants to sell, everybody wants to sort of sell capacity sort of 12, 24 months and 36 months ahead of time. And so, whether somebody would dynamically use it, the answer is yes. It'll happen.
I want to turn for the final 2 or 3 minutes just to thinking about how you run, thinking for the benefit of vendors here who are thinking about particularly moving into more of an as-a-service model and the challenges of doing that. I'd like each of you really just to give a flavour of what is it that you need to do in your business, and I think you touched on this earlier, to really be a true cloud service rather than somebody who's paying lip service to it. So, let's
Yeah,
go down
I
the
think
line.
that solid software design is more important than ever. You have to do all the things around testing, backwards compatibility, all of course, in an as-a-service world, all customers are getting the same software, more or less, meaning that you also need to cater for all the various variants in that. So solid, good software design from ground up is absolutely key. You can't cheat on that.
So I think the key thing is to be very clear on what's important to the customer and be flexible in how that shapes as the service evolves. So start small, start clearly with what the value proposition is, and really refine it.
I think transparency of the service that you're providing, make sure that everybody can see what's happening with that, and the agility to adapt to new situations within their business.
Yeah, I think initially, things like egress costs and stuff like that were very threatening, as the concept of it, saying that I don't incur that now, I'm going to incur this. But I think people sort of are in reconciling the fact that it is not that sort of, if you really do the spreadsheets and do the actual sort of volume of traffic that goes through, those are not going to be the ones. But the key ones I think are strategically important is the application layer and the dynamism that it brings to them for their business needs.
Good. Now we have 90 seconds left, so I want to ask one more question, which I think is also important, and it reflects a couple of questions that have come in. And that is, you're all dependent on the big public cloud providers for your cloud services in one way or another. What are the challenges of working with the likes of AWS and Azure and Google Cloud Platform? Are they easy to work with if you're a relatively small vendor?
First of all, they are very different, and this is a session of its own. But you have to do your homework on checking what made, if you take the three largest ones, what made Google, AWS, and Microsoft successful in the previous life, in the sense that they even existed 20 years ago, and what are their strategies, where Google is great at commoditize the complement, AWS have an insane innovation cycle, and Microsoft is good at never giving up and just run with it until they... So you have to do a little bit of history lesson on how they acted in the past and see how that fits for your future.
Paul, briefly?
For us, so many things we could do. The biggest challenge we have is, what do we do first?
Yeah, I think as perhaps a smaller player that we've been relatively easy to integrate with AWS and Azure. We've had great feedback from them, so it hasn't been too difficult for us to do that.
I think if there's one thing that AWS, Google, and public clouds have really done is democratize the whole process for anybody, right? I mean, if being a small vendor actually now puts you on par with the big vendor, and cloud gives you instant tools and so on and so forth. It's all about software, and the agility with which you are able to sort of bring in innovation there really what will distinguish you. And there's a level playing field thanks to these vendors.